Hi, for those of you who may not know me, I'm Robert, and I read 22 books this year, and I want to tell you about them. So let's crack into it. So first up, we've got something like an autobiography by Akira Kurosawa. It was really interesting getting to see what made Kurosawa, just going through his childhood up into, you know, his working days. He started out as an apprentice making movies and then became a screenwriter and then became a director. And the book also has some really good insights on what Kurosawa thought was important in making movies, but those are saved for the end. Next up, we've got Sanford Meisner on acting. I went to school for acting. I got my BFA in musical theater, but I never really studied the Meisner technique. So getting to read this book and see the differences in the Meisner technique and then compare that to what I taught, what I'd learned growing up doing theater, it was really interesting, and I was so ready to be able to implement the Meisner technique whenever I got back on stage, which I read this book around late January, early February, and I didn't get back on stage until December of this year, so it was quite some time to ponder. So next up, we've got Love Songs by Sarah Teasdale, which is a book of poetry. I actually received this as a birthday gift 2 years ago, and I sat down and read through it in less than a night. I loved Sarah Teasdale's poetry, and I found her through doing choral music, so getting to sit down and read some of the inspiration for some of that music was just so nice. I highly recommend it. Hey everyone, Editing Robert here. I actually left out a book. I left out In the Blink of an Eye by Walter Murch. That book is a great insight into film editing. So I try to get at least those two perspectives this year, the whole directing and editing perspectives. Film directing shot by shot. Oh my gosh, this book took me a little bit of time to get through. It's not a thick book, but it's got a lot of information. Very insightful. If you're wanting to learn how to direct, definitely read that book. I will tell you the first 80 pages are just on storyboarding, but that can be very important if you're using storyboards. But I think that the information in it is absolutely indispensable. Yeah, definitely check it out if you're interested in directing. So I read The Art of War this year. I wanted to read it not so much because I wanted to learn how to wage war, but because I wanted to see, one, what Sun Tzu had to say, and two, because I do feel that there are, I don't want to say scriptures or proverbs, but quotes from the book that can be used in everyday life. Not to say that everything is combat, but you can find ways to incorporate the sayings of Sun Tzu, and I'm going to end it here so I'm not being redundant. So I remember it was late May and it was warming up. You know, I'm here in the southern United States. It's warm most of the year, but it was a really nice day, and I took this book out and I was set on finishing it, and I did finish it. And you know, Marcus Aurelius wrote this it was essentially his diary, and he didn't intend for anyone to read it, so it's just really his personal thoughts and what he held close to himself. And so getting to see that was so interesting, peering into his mind. Definitely a lot of useful quotes, like with Sun Tzu, but coming from a Stoic perspective. So I am a huge fan of the Andrew Lloyd Webber adaptation. As many people are, it was actually my first introduction to the story, and I finally got around to reading it this year, and the inconsistencies and the artistic liberties Mr. Webber took with this story were very, very liberal. So much got left out, which granted, you know, he's got to fit it into a 2-hour musical. But still love the musical, and I really enjoyed the book. Read it if you haven't, and especially if you do like the musical. If We Were Villains, oh my goodness, I'd heard nothing but good things about this book, and they were all true. It follows these 7 conservatory students who are mostly going to school for Shakespeare, and one of them winds up dead, and so we don't learn who does that until the end of the book. But it's just full of twists and turns, and since I went to school with theater people, you know, these were characters that I felt that I knew, and I genuinely missed them once I had finished the book. It is fantastic. Whenever ML Rio comes out with another book, you best believe I'm gonna get it. So this book is somewhat topical for what we're seeing in the United States right now. For legal purposes, that is a joke. But in this, Trotsky is really building upon the Marxist-Leninist idea of the Vanguard Party, who gives the proletariat the resources to overthrow capitalism. But in this sense, he's saying, you know, we arm them and we educate them, and that is how we oppose fascism. A very, very good read. He goes into sort of how fascism arose in the 20th century. So yeah, check it out if you're interested in that. So sort of on the same note, we have Night, and I first encountered this book my sophomore year of high school, and it really left a mark on me, and I'd been wanting to get my hands on a copy of it for quite some time, and I finally was able to this year. And it's gut-wrenching reading and just seeing all the atrocious things that he saw in Auschwitz and during the Holocaust. Yeah, it's just, yeah. So I think out of all the books on this list, this is the one that took me the longest to read. It is a thick book. It's a very thick book. And the print is about that big. So I think it took me about 2 months to get through this one. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. Here in the States, you know, the public school systems don't really do a good job at talking about who Malcolm X was. They normally just say, you know, he was the foil to MLK. But, you know, he's a person, he's three-dimensional, he's more than that. And this book really goes into it. And I came out of it with a great deal of respect more for Malcolm X and what he did than I had going into it. So yeah. This was the book that I needed for some time. I'd been going through it with my transition from college into working, and sorry, a little water break there. I also lost my dog this year back in August. He was 15. And so I was just really going through it, and I read this book, and it was the book that I needed. It's Camus' explanation of his whole philosophy of absurdism. And I just really vibe with absurdism. So if you're going through it, you know, rough patch, definitely check this book out. So immediately following that, I read The Stranger, which I would suggest actually swapping the two. Read The Stranger, then read The Myth of Sisyphus. It's a very quick read. I read the last 85% of it in a day. I could not put it down. Story of Meursault, who, you know, he shoots a man, and then his trial becomes more so about why he didn't cry at his mother's funeral. Very much so. A man pitted with the absurd and facing the absurd head on. Great read. Do check it out. I highly recommend it. So this was a book that I had to read for my first year seminar when I got to college, and I'll tell myself I didn't read all of it. Sorry, Dr. Anderson, if you're watching this. But but I decided to read through it this year, and Raymond Carver, you know, he writes these stories that are very much real. They feel like they've actually happened. They're dark, they're gritty, they're full of people making these choices, and sometimes they choose to regret them. Very topical, all of his stories. But no, Raymond Carver, he really writes, and you can tell which character is speaking when they're speaking, which is always a good thing with writers. But yeah, it's just this dark realism with him, and I really enjoyed that. So I got into philosophy this year, and with philosophy, you know, we focus a lot on Western philosophy, you know, Aristotle, Plato, Nietzsche, Kant, Sartre, but we don't need to leave out Eastern philosophy. It's also really important. And so I read the complete works of Confucius, and I really do have a great deal of respect for what Confucius taught. One of his quotes that really stuck out to me was, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's something along the lines of, learn as though you were separated from your object and you were always fighting so you wouldn't lose it. And that really resonated with me. But a big tenet of Confucianism is just a veracity for learning, and I very much appreciate that. Especially where I am right now, I'm trying to learn as much as I can. So with this book, I was strolling through Ollie's one day. I frequent Ollie's a lot. And I saw this book, flipped through it, and I said, I'm getting this because it was only $2. And it was a great read. It's a great overview of a lot of different aspects of philosophy. It's called Philosophy 101 because it truly is a crash course into philosophy. So if you're just getting into it like I am, it's a great place to start. Definitely check it out if you're interested. So now we get to The Prince, and I really thought that this book was something else, you know. Machiavelli, he's talking about, you know, different municipalities, how different princes or rulers can protect their land, how they can lose it. And, you know, he's really just talking about this, not like this iron fist rule, but a rule that's a bit more ruthless. And that's really what sort of made this text really made people buzz about it. So now we've got the social contract, another piece of political philosophy. And the funny thing about this is it's full of contradictions, but they're contradictions that make sense. Like, there's this one part where Rousseau's talking about, you know, his collective, the sovereign, and the members of the sovereign, which is just the members of the community. They all give up their land, but since they all give up their land, none of them really do, because it already all belongs to them. He talks about three different forms of government and how best they're ruled, and I'm not sure that I agree with that, but I can see how it would make sense. So yeah, a lot of different takeaways from that book. So now we're coming up on our third and final Camus book for the year. 2023 made me a Camus fanboy. And we follow this man who was a lawyer. His name's Clemens. And he tells us about how he went from his position as a Parisian lawyer to where he is now in Amsterdam. And it's a bit sad, but it's a very interesting story about human innocence and what it is, how it works, how we can gain it and lose it. Which innocence is also a big part of the absurdist philosophy, so that also kind of ties into the previous two. So, sort of coming up on a theme from earlier, we've got the rise and fall of you-know-who. Very interesting seeing some of the parallels between he and one of the former presidents I won't name here. It's also just a bit scary seeing some of the parallels and seeing how quickly people can be put on to ideologies like that. And it just really makes you think, what can we do to prevent stuff like that from happening again? And so rounding out the year, we've got the Tao Te Ching, and you know, Taoism and Confucianism are two very big schools of thought over in Asia, and I really just wanted to get a better grasp of both of them. I mean, they both have their differences and similarities. I'm not sure whether I prefer either of the two, but I can see how important they've been in Eastern culture, and I've got a great deal of respect for both of them. But yeah, that's my 2023 in books. I'm hopefully going to get to read more here in 2024. But yeah, I might make another one of these. We'll see what happens. But yeah, thank you for watching. Subscribe if you like. I'll see you later.